Okay, welcome back. I'll offer a few reflections and then we'll open it up to questions and comments. Many of these teachings and many moments in our lives, they ask of us to change our understanding, to evolve our understanding of what this life is, its meaning. We talk about often the change in perspective or understanding from seeing ourselves as separate, isolated, to connected, opening up to our relationality with the world. We also talk about often changing our perspective from seeing ourselves and others as permanent, stable, opening up to see the fragility, the vulnerability, the constant change in our world, in our lives. There's another teaching in the tradition that also asks of us the same thing, but in a slightly different way. It's called the teaching of the heavenly messengers or the divine messengers. The legend goes that the young Prince Siddhartha, who was to become the Buddha, 2,600 years ago, lived in a palace, was given everything he could ever want and need, entertained, given pleasure, never having to see or experience any stress or suffering. Until one day in his 30s, he got curious and he climbed the castle walls. He peered out and he saw four things. He saw a sick person, he saw an old person, and he saw a dead body. And then he saw a monk or an ascetic walking a spiritual path. And this for him changed everything, changed his entire perspective and understanding of what life is as a human being, what life is and will be for him, that he too would age, he too would be subject to illness, he too would die, and that there was a way to walk this human life in dignity, integrity, in truth. Knowing these things. So at that moment, the Buddha was forced to change his understanding of life and then began to practice that understanding in deeper and deeper ways. Who in their right mind today, or perhaps even then, 2,600 years ago, would call sickness or old age or death a heavenly messenger? We think of those things as, I don't know, something, some angel coming down with light and halo and offering us some encouraging guidance or special message. Certainly, we don't often think of sickness, old age, and death as encouraging or hopeful. But here we are today, this current state of the world where COVID-19 is asking of us something. We all go through times in our lives where our view that we've been holding gets shaken, sometimes to the core, when we or others experience sickness or aging or death. But right now, the whole world is experiencing that. And as we open our hearts to that reality, we can feel the whole world shaking. We can feel a chasm opening, a groundlessness, a collective encouragement to change our view on what it is to be human on this earth, what it is to be part of this earth as a human being. To change our view around, in particular, health and illness, but also death. Can COVID-19 be a heavenly messenger? Can COVID-19 teach the Dharma? Certainly not to justify the harm and the suffering that is being caused at the moment. Certainly not to say one should not take precautions and to protect the life and the health they have. More to say that sickness, old age, and death are part and parcel of this life. They're part of our nature. They're part of nature itself. We are subject to them. We cannot escape them. We have not gone beyond them. Yet we, like the Buddha, have been raised, or at least most of us, inside some semblance of palace walls. Whether it was from our own privilege, whether it was from the culture itself that doesn't speak about sickness, old age, and death very publicly, or whether it was from the layers of self-protection psychologically that we put up to not feel the depth of pain and loss that's associated with these things, or maybe all three. And for the Buddha, it was curiosity that had him climb and scale the walls to see. For he had no other reason. He had no suffering or stress in his life. And for us, it can be too. Curiosity being a very wise attitude to take. A curiosity that sometimes does draw us into the deeper places of pain in our hearts. But more often than not, and in this instance, in this time of global challenge, it may be stress and suffering that actually gets us to climb or to dismantle this wall, this palace, or perhaps it's being dismantled before our eyes without our choice. It's a fascinating time because this virus is invisible. Billions of people now are cloistered in their homes, protecting themselves in fear and anxiety of this invisible part of life that is moving silently through the crowds. This is not so different than how we might think about sickness, old age, and in particularly death. especially if we're young and healthy people. Those things seem like illusions. They seem invisible. And for all of us, death acts this way. We assume we'll wake up tomorrow. We assume we'll have the opportunity to fulfill the plans that we hold in our minds and hearts. But it can come at any time. So part of this practice of changing our view is first to make that which is invisible visible. Sadly, we live in a culture, and I was raised in a culture where it wasn't really made visible as a part of life, as a part of nature. So in my practice now, I get to be that grandmotherly figure that I never had. I say, yeah, this is the way it is. Imagine telling myself as a child, yes, you will grow old. You will experience sickness at times. And you will die. And it's okay. All those things are okay. There will be challenge in yourself. There will be challenge in society. But you don't need to argue with it. Because no matter what happens, you'll be okay. So just go out and do your best to be your fullest self and to love what's in front of you. Because it won't last forever. We not only have to make that which has been invisible to us visible, but then change our view on it, change our perspective, our attitude, which changes ourselves. It transforms ourselves and how we show up in the world. This is an opportunity for all of us who have felt and feel anxiety and fear at this time. Say, oh, that's an indicator. That's telling me that I don't have the wisest view about this moment. I don't have the wisest view about this global crisis. This is a global opportunity to start to see the nature of our lives collectively. But why? Why would we do this? Certainly that's the most common response, whether we're conscious of it or not, is, well, why would we approach something that's so unpleasant? Sure, we have to experience those things sometimes, but in the meantime, until then, I'd like to fill my life with comfort and familiarity and pleasantness, right? Doesn't that make sense? And on one level, certainly it does. I'd like to fill my life with distraction and denial and avoidance. We don't think that way, but we choose that. The aversion to those realities is so strong that often they have to knock us off our feet before we pay attention to them. But the thing that we aren't told is that it's okay. The thing we aren't told is that the point of attending to these parts of our lives is not just to be in some unpleasant state. It's not just to come to terms with or be somewhat satisfied with that which is unpleasant. And it's not about flogging ourselves and making us suffer. It's about seeing where those truths of our lives point us and walking like the Buddha saw that monk or ascetic, walking a spiritual path that goes beyond, that actually goes to a place of lasting peace, goes to a place of fulfillment and happiness that nothing in this changing and unstable life, no person, no place, no thing could ever bring. So each of these things, sickness, old age, and death, are actually doorways. They're messengers from beyond, telling us about the potential of ourselves and our lives. And sometimes the medicine that we need is bitter at first. And certainly reflecting on these things at first often bring us into a space of grief. And that's a transition we can make right now from anxiety and fear to this open-hearted grief for the suffering that is happening right now. But as we move deeper into that grief, we move deeper through that experience, we may come into the space of openness itself. We may come into what is often called in the tradition the deathless, a space of awareness, of presence. A space of alignment with the laws of nature, where there isn't arguing or fighting with the way things are. In fact, quite the opposite. An embracing of the preciousness of what is, however fleeting it may be, individually and collectively. A tenderness, a spaciousness. A sense of deep stability, at homeness, completeness, even amidst what's happening, even amidst the shaking of our lives. But anxiety arises again, fear arises again. How do I know this is okay? How do I know, how could this be okay? And certainly on one level, it's not. We need to take it seriously that there is real suffering. And that we do have a responsibility to protect ourselves and others. A responsibility to life, to protect life. Yes, it's true on a level. And so here we are at home, practicing social isolation, social distancing, protecting those vulnerable populations, protecting the healthcare system at this time. But there's a deeper okayness that we each can come to as we each approach these stages of our lives: sickness, old age, and death. How? When we get quiet. In this practice, we get quiet and we listen. We listen and we keep listening to our lives. We keep listening to the present moment. We listen to our hearts and our minds. We listen to our bodies, but then we also listen to the silence and the spaciousness. And we listen until we become the listening itself. We be with our experience. We stay with our experience until we become the being with itself. We become the beingness itself. I think it's important that we remember that we didn't do this. We didn't create these circumstances. We didn't create sickness, old age. We didn't create our own mortality. These are the laws of nature. This is the Dharma. This is the way things are. This is the way things have always been. Some estimate over 100 billion humans have already died on this earth. 100 billion humans. Over 10 times the amount that are living right now have already passed. Where are their bodies? Part of this earth. Part of this air. Part of the water, the fire. They have become the elements that have now made up our bodies. In this way, there's actually more dead humans than there are living. Just to say, this is nature. This is the way it's been. This is the way it will be. And just because of that, it's okay. As we practice more, there's a deepening of faith that what is okay. It's okay because it is. And I don't mean that we don't respond with compassion to the suffering that's before us. But that we don't argue with it. We don't resist it. We just respond to it. Important difference. We don't judge it. That person is bad. That thing is bad or wrong. I'm bad or wrong. No one's wrong for being sick or bad. No one's wrong for being old or worth less. No one's at fault for dying. This is the way of things. I listened to a talk by John Trudell, a Native American activist and author, the other day, and one of the lines he said was, "Judgment is a completely irresponsible view of reality." I love that. To deny or judge sickness, old age, or death is a completely irresponsible view of reality. It's not just false, it's not just unpleasant to be in a state of judgment. It's actually irresponsible. We each have a responsibility to align our hearts and minds with the laws of nature themselves so that we can be at ease in this life. So we can have access to the peace of the present moment. And so that we can care for others and show others this truth. So that we can stop living our lives in anxiety of the unpleasant that is on the horizon, but to live our lives in connectedness, togetherness, holding the preciousness of this life in this moment, each moment, an opportunity, each condition, an opportunity. In the Buddhist tradition, it's suggested that we reflect on this every day. The mind is thick. The layers of our psyche are many. Knowing this on just an intellectual level just scratches the surface. We have to know this in our hearts. We have to know this in our bodies, in every cell. We are of the nature to age. We are of the nature to get sick. We are of the nature to die. We are of the nature to be separated from everything we care about. And we are responsible for our own actions in response to this. Those are the 5 reflections. We are of the nature to get old. We are of the nature to get sick. We are of the nature to die. We are of the nature to be separated or to lose everything we love and care about. And we're responsible for our own actions and responses. So we may not have created these conditions, certainly, of this world, even created the conditioning of our own minds, and yet we're responsible. We're responsible to what comes through us in a moment. We're responsible for the conditioning we've inherited from family and culture, from ancestry. And we're responsible as spiritual practitioners to change our view of sickness, old age, and death, to see them as heavenly messengers. And we're responsible in this time to see this global crisis, to see COVID-19 in a similar light, as an opportunity to open our hearts even further to the painful and yet liberating truths of this life that we live together. And from this place, care even more deeply. Approaching these things is not easy. Sometimes we just simply need to be with the anxiety or the fear. Just try to be kind to it. Just hang in there while it's overwhelming our experience. And to be honest with where we are in this process. One of my teachers is dying of cancer, and I went to visit him recently. One of the insights he shared with me is that now he thinks love is the most important. Hadn't been his practice of choice to cultivate the experience of loving kindness. But now it is. Now relationship is important, perhaps the most important. And there's many stories of people dying or on their deathbeds, somewhere along a terminal illness where they finally surrender and their heart opens. Heart opens to others, to the preciousness of life, to the expansiveness of the present moment. Proving that these things are messaging. If we can walk through their doorways, and we don't have to wait till the moment it comes. We think that the only form of protection is to hide away, psychologically or physically, to escape, to distance. Certainly, this is important at times, to draw boundaries. But in a bigger perspective, it's not a lasting strategy. It's not true protection. It's a false refuge, the way we shelter ourselves. And that if we are to grow up spiritually, we need to include these larger truths and trust that there is a greater protection. There's a greater protection than just distancing ourselves from the unpleasant conditions or people or places. There's a greater protection in this present moment itself, in awareness itself. There's protection in the connection we have to all things. There's protection in our relatedness. Certainly we can feel the experience of the world right now. That's because we're connected. So we're affected because we're connected, but we're also protected. Knowing that we are part of everything. We belong to this earth. We belong to one another. And that even in sickness, old age, and death, we will give ourselves back to everything. Just as our ancestors have. So yes, it may be very challenging right now, and there's a teaching of the Dharma here, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel saying, well, this too is okay. It may not make sense right now. It may not feel okay right now. But this too, I can include this too. So I'd like to open it up to everyone for questions, comments, sharings about what it is for you right now.